Dynamite Deca, a game that in America went by Die Hard Arcade. Yeah, I don't know why either, but somehow, for some reason, someone thought it was a good idea to get the Die Hard license attached to this. Despite not having, anything to do with Die Hard. It's weird, okay? Anyway, you play as John McClane, or Bruno Dillinger, depending on what philosophy you subscribe to. Your mission? Infiltrate a tower that's swarming with terrorists that are trying to make the biggest heist in human history. They're also trying to kidnap the president's daughter. So basically what this game is asking you is, are you a bad enough dude to rescue the president's daughter? Okay, that was the worst thing ever, and I'm keeping it. Now regardless of which version you think this is, it's a really cool port of an arcade game that has some pretty interesting origins. This game was, at one very brief point in its development, going to actually be the fourth Streets of Rage game. And then that fell through. And then they tried to do it with Fighting Force. And then that fell through. And then the fans just said, screw it, we'll do it ourselves, and it was good. So while this isn't the legendary Streets of Rage 4 we all hoped for, this game does have a very unique feel to it. Gameplay-wise, the basic premise is, you know when you play a beat-em-up and you see a knife lying on the ground, you pick it up and you feel invincible. Well, this is basically that, the video game. Because wherever you go on whatever level you play, the ground is going to be littered with weapons. Stuff like brooms, antique clocks, there's an anti-tank cannon in the bathroom for some reason. You can even pick up tiny little bits in a sub-inventory that's literally stored in your ass. And you can hold unlimited stuff in this sub-inventory. Sure, you could store stuff like additional clips of ammo, but there's also random miscellaneous, which you can end up turning into different pieces of equipment, like a lighter and a can of hairspray, which you turn into a flamethrower. And yeah, suddenly this game gets a million times cooler. Now when you don't have a weapon, the game is a pretty basic beat-em-up. You just walk up to an enemy, punch them a bunch of times until they die. Occasionally you can knock them on the ground though, and if you manage to get them on the ground, or sometimes if you can get behind them while you're standing up, you can actually arrest them, which instantaneously remove them from the battlefield. It's a really neat system, but it felt very inconsistent. I couldn't really figure out how to make it happen, more than once or twice, so I wouldn't rely on this system. But when you're not arresting fools, you are punching the ever-living hell out of them, turning them into a bloody paste on your hands. And that's incredibly satisfying. Absolutely the basic fighting mechanics are spot on. There are tons and tons of different moves, and while they are kind of random, they are certainly varied and stylish. In addition, there are a lot of different set pieces that interact with your character, such as this one, which really stood out to me, which has a fire truck in the background spraying water everywhere. If you get hit by this, you get knocked down, so you kind of have to avoid that. It's very cool, and it turns the mundanity of a simple beat-em-up into something that varies it up quite a bit. I really enjoyed this. The soundtrack was fittingly bombastic for a B-grade action film that this game is definitely trying to be, although honestly it's not wildly memorable. I think that the sound effects are really, really well done though. A lot of the punches, or just smacking people with weapons, shooting guns, they all sound like they have a very satisfying amount of impact to them, which means that fighting is audibly very satisfying. And the game looks pretty good. Considering that this is a arcade port on the Saturn, the environments are varied, and they look well done. There's tons of different enemy models, tons of different weapon models, and one of the most standout things about how this game looks are the animations, because there are so many different attacks in this game. Now I honestly can't prove this, but I think that several of the attack animations were taken from Virtua Fighter 2. You know, the jump kicks, grabs, throws, that sort of thing. It did remind me a lot of stuff I'd seen from Virtua Fighter 2. Again, I can't prove it, and it might just be similarities, but if nothing else, that's sort of the animation quality you can expect from this game. Now this is an arcade game, so in terms of replayability, it really does come from just trying to get through it. It's very difficult, and unlike a lot of other arcade ports, you can't simply add more credits. You are on a fixed number of lives, and if you run out of lives, you are forced into a game over state. However, you can earn more lives, and it's done through a pretty brilliant system. On the start menu, you can access something known as Deep Scan. If you're not familiar with this is an incredibly old Sega arcade game where you play a little boat sitting on top of the water trying to drop depth charges on submarines trying to sink you. Now, while this game isn't wildly deep or anything, I did think it was a really brilliant way to incorporate gaining more lives. Because not only do you end up gaining more lives by playing this game, you become more familiar with Sega's gaming history. And more importantly, instead of grinding mindlessly for points, or simply hitting a button to digitally add another quarter to the machine, so to speak, they give you a whole different game to play. That is awesome. And the fact that they're willing to just give you another game for the sake of continuing to play their game is awesome, and I absolutely loved it. Now, on the other hand, there is one major downside to this game. It has QuickTime events. In between action stages, you're occasionally thrown into a QuickTime event scenario. Your character's running down the hall and they have to attack a baddie, or they end up getting hurt. Honestly, these were done okay, because if you fail them, you don't instantly lose. Your character might take a little bit of damage, or you might have to fight an extra character or two. But in the end, it's not that big a loss. I still don't care for the QuickTime events. However, I will say this. I love that when you knock out an opponent in a QuickTime event, your character, for just the briefest moment, glances back, just with a little bit of regret, to just think, wow, you are that much of a faceless baddie that I took you out in one punch and you never even saw it coming. Man, am I embarrassed for you. Seriously, that one little quick glance, perfect. Now, if you want this game on the Saturn, it does tend to vary a bit wildly in prices. I've seen them average out the $40 to $70 range in terms of costs. However, I managed to get it for less than $5. So keep your eyes out on auctions, because it does go for a fairly low price if you're willing to keep your ear to the ground. There was of course also the arcade release in which this was based off of, as well as a Sega Ages PS2 release, which also contains a few bonus features, including alternate costumes and the like. If you've got a Japanese PS2, that's also an option. Not only that, it managed to do well enough that it got not one, but kinda two sequels. It's a bit tricky to explain, but Dynamite Decca 2 came out for the Sega Dreamcast, and in North America was called Dynamite Cop. Haven't played it, but I hear it's pretty good. And then there was a weird third one only released in China, which was kind of like a weird reskinned mod version of Dynamite Cop. Again, don't know much about it, I've seen some pictures, it looks fun, but it's definitely a bit different. But that's Die Hard Arcade. One of many games that have the Die Hard license. And for some reason, despite the fact that this one really shouldn't. Either way, it is by far the best Die Hard game I have played thus far. Granted, I've only played about 2, but still, it's good.